Hello, welcome everybody to the latest Sigma webinar. Thank you for joining early and on time. We're going to let everybody get settled in. I'm seeing the attendees number rise, so we're just going to give it a moment for that number to plateau. In the meantime, feel free to familiarize yourself with the Bright Talk platform. There's actually a questions button on the right-hand tab here. If you hop in there any point throughout this session, if you have questions for during our fireside chat, feel free to post them in there or during our demo. And then there's also a attachments. It's a little paper clip also on that same tab. That's where you'll be able to find some additional collateral about accelerating revenue planning with cloud analytics, specifically Sigma actually. So I'm gonna wait just a moment as more people join, and then we'll begin momentarily. All right, so let's begin. This session is on accelerating revenue planning with cloud analytics. Some light housekeeping up top. Again, you can post questions throughout the session. It's on the upright end of the tab there in the Bright Talk platform, and that's what we'll circle back to at the end of the session for live Q&A. So if you have anything for questions for our esteemed guests, best practices in revenue planning, we'll be able to address those, as well as anything about the demo we're going to perform during this session. Everything today is going to be recorded, so if you get up, if you miss a part, if you want to do real-time playback of the demo and see certain sections, how Oscar was able to do something, that'll all be available afterwards via email. So without any delay, some quick introductions. My name is Zach Norton. I'm your moderator today. I'm going to be in that questions tab, keeping an eye out for any feedback. I'm joined by Brian Murphy. He's our Chief Revenue Officer at Sigma. He works very closely with Orla Clifford, who is our VP of Operations. And Oscar Bashar is one of our esteemed demo engineers. He's going to take you through in practice what Orla and Brian collaborate on every day within Sigma. So moving forward, we'll actually move these slides out of the way. And actually, let's get right into some of the questions here. So Orla, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, how you ended up here, a little bit about your current role.
Happy to. So first of all, thank you for having me on. And Zach, so as you said, my name is Orla Clifford. I'm VP of Operations here at Sigma Computing. How I got to here? Well, I guess I come from a family of data nerds. So the obvious path for me in life was always to look at something in data. And so I became a developer. But I learned very quickly that I was better at organizing a development team than I was at actually developing itself. So from there, moved out of development into operations, and from there moved consistently closer and closer to revenue until I joined my last gig at Druva, and then here at Sigma when I've been working in revenue operations. So my trajectory has always been through the path of data. Sigma was obviously the perfect fit for me. I was never more excited to look at an application than the first time I saw the demo of Sigma.
All right, so it's a story of following the data, but that's also kind of following the money, or the data led you to the money. All right, gotcha.
Yeah, well, if I was following the money, I would never have been in operations, so I'm not sure about that.
Gotcha. All right, well, speaking of money, Brian, tell us about your background, how you end up in your role.
Yeah, sure. So again, Brian Murphy, Chief Revenue Officer at Sigma. I've been in sales my whole life. It was kind of a family tradition. I grew up in the Boston area, and I was the youngest of four. My father was one of nine. Six of my uncles and aunts were sales leaders. So kind of the joke for me is that my Thanksgiving dinners were usually like a forecast call, but they were really uncomfortable. So I was around it my entire life. My first entrance into the enterprise software space was at a company called Cognos, which was subsequently acquired by IBM some time ago. So albeit though I was in sales, Cognos was a kind of legacy BI tool. And I learned pretty quickly that as a sales professional, data is instrumental as far as where you spend your time. And one of the most important things a salesperson has to do is make efficient use of their time. I'm full of stupid cliches, a lot of them. But one of them is just because you're busy, it doesn't mean you're doing a good job, right? So, I learned pretty early in my career, fortunately, that data is pretty instrumental as far as being effective as a salesperson and a sales leader.
To kind of go back to you, Orla, if you talk about what is the way that you use data in operations today?
Oh God, I use data for absolutely everything. One of the operating principles that we have here at Sigma Computing is that we are data driven. So we look to the data first to try and understand what we're seeing in the business, what we're forecasting in the business, how we think about where to invest, how we think about where to allocate resources. So for me, and this obviously is something that works very well with me just because this is, I have always been data driven. We use data to understand everything from our planning cycle to our resource allocation, to our forecasting, to how we're doing and how we're trending in the business, to all the way down to how we're doing on having people coming to the office. The data is primate in all things for us.
And would you say Sigma's changed the way that you use the data as compared to previously?
100%. Like I said in the introduction, I was never more excited when I saw the first demo of the Sigma tool, which was before I joined the company. Because I think, my entire life, as I've said, my entire career, I've been very much focused on data and having the data tell us where we should go and what we should focus on. But the challenge I've always had in all previous roles where I've been in this, doing this thing, is that I've always had trouble accessing data at the most granular level of detail to help me truly understand the context of the story that is being told. So I would get aggregated or be able to see aggregated data, but I could never follow that story all the way down to the true source at the most granular level. So candidly, what I did in all previous roles, and I'm sure Brian will say the same thing, is I used whatever BI tool was available to me corporately, simply as a portal to extract that data, export it, bring it to Excel, and then do the analysis in Excel so that I could look at it both top down and bottoms up, because I truly believe that you need to look at it from both directions in order to truly understand the context. And that's great. And Excel is a wonderful, wonderful tool. But when you start to deal with huge and large data sets, Excel falls over. So that's the first issue that you have. You have to start knitting things together. And also that data becomes stale very, very quickly because it's not being live piped. So I've always had the challenge prior to joining Sigma where I would do that analysis, arrive at some conclusions, bring it back to the rest of the company and have to debate whether that data had changed since I had done the extract, or that it was, somehow telling a misleading story because it was coming all the way up from the bottoms up. With Sigma, that's something that has gone away from me. Obviously, I have direct access to the live data, so it's constantly up to date, and I can traverse the data stack right from the most granular row level line item all the way up to the insight that I want to share with Brian or share with an exec team or share with the advisors. So that ability to be able to truly tell the story has massively changed the confidence with which we can present our data.
Great. So Orla, you get that workbook finished and then you hand it over to Brian. Brian, you tell me how you use data in your role and how that's changed.
Yeah, as a CRO, I'm not short on metrics. There is a lot of different metrics that we measure. It's sales qualified leads, conversion ratio on that, total pipeline coverage, rep productivity, rep ramp time. I could go on and basically consume the entire webinar with all the different metrics that we use. So, for me, everything that we do, my job ultimately is to bring the best people in-house, guide them, develop them, continue to grow the business at a really high level. Everything that I do really revolves around data. Orla talked about being a data-driven company. One of the things our CEO, Mike Palmer, always says is, show me the data. So when you're having a conversation, he doesn't like storylines, likes data. That's something that we do all the time. So I use it every single day when I'm having a coaching conversation, when I'm telling someone where they need to focus, they improve, or where there's an opportunity. There's data behind it. So it's legitimately everything that I do. You're going to be 10 times more impactful having that conversation and showing information behind that. And the great thing about it is that you can have a debate, right? I understand that there's context and not every single decision is made purely on data. But what you can do with Sigma is you're agile enough to be able to ask questions live and have that debate. So without Sigma, you're not able to do that. What you end up doing is arguing over data and having a debate with no kind of recourse or ability to be able to ask the second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever question there is. So for me, it's instrumental into what I need to do to be effective. More importantly, or maybe equally as important, my team has to be able to do that as well, right? So if I have a leader that is a leader of leaders, I can have that conversation with them, and there's maybe an opportunity for improvement for them and their business. They might have 5 or 6 leaders, and there might be 1 or 2 that are doing things really well and that they're excelling in a particular metric that I'm talking about, and 1 that is lagging on that, right? I can go and look at that, but enabling my team to be able to do that is actually more powerful, because I can't have the conversations. If you want to scale a business, you have to enable people to do that and empower people, which is pretty important. So it's not just about how I use the information. It's really about how I enable my team to do so as well.
And can you talk a little bit about like what sources are coming up through the Sigma Workbook? What's the actual root level data?
Maybe I'll start there. So we have a number, like every other tech company, we have a very rich tech stack in our go-to-market process. So we have data that's coming obviously from Salesforce, which is our system of record as a CRM. But we also have data coming in to Snowflake that we use in the analysis that we're doing from HubSpot, which is our marketing CRM. We have data that's coming in from the product, data that's coming from outreach, data that's coming from Gong. And what we've done at Sigma is we've knit all of those sources together to understand and develop a true customer and prospect journey, so that we know at every stage of the process who and what are we doing with any given prospect. So let's say, for example, Zach, you're a prospect for us, and you come to us first by logging onto this webinar, for example. We obviously know that because you've registered for the webinar, and we're capturing that in HubSpot. That's touch 1 from an attribution perspective. But then you may download an ebook or read a blog. We know that too. You then might sign up for a trial and go into the trial, and then you start to do things in the product. We understand what you are doing in the product, and ultimately we have a BDR reaching out to you to set up some meetings. You take a sales call. Now we have the sales data coming together. So what we've done and what we do at Sigma is knit that entire set of touches into a journey, so that at any point we know where you are in our cycle, and we can start to forecast based on the activities that you've taken what the likely outcome is for us. That for me is truly powerful, because we're not looking at the data in silos. The marketing data sits out here, and the product data sits out there, and the customer success data sits somewhere else. We've brought it all together. So that's an incredibly powerful tool for us from a prospecting perspective, but also understanding how the different teams are performing. So how is our marketing team performing, or how is our BDR team performing relative to the targets that we've set? We can insert ourselves anywhere into that data model.
That is very impressive, just the way that you're hopping over so many different data marts to actually get that holistic view of the entire customer or prospect journey. It's intimidating. I'm glad I'm outside the funnel. I got these questions for you, Brian. They're on a green cue card because they're the revenue planning questions. So if you could tell us, what is revenue planning? How does it impact the sales organization?
Yeah. Revenue planning effectively is figuring out how to responsibly grow the business. And where you can make investments to do so. And really there's 2 things that data helps me with. One is where there's opportunity that I'm not necessarily capitalizing on, and then places where I might be over investing, which are risk associated with that. For our business specifically in B2B sales, there's a lot of different things, again, metrics that I look at and that we look at as an organization. And Oscar will talk a little bit about this later in the demo. But really, I constantly have to balance between putting individuals in areas where they're going to be productive and be successful, but not putting too many people that there's not enough opportunity for those individuals in there. And it is a very, very difficult thing to do. And the consequences of getting that wrong are very, very expensive. So a simple example, if I do not put people in a particular area and expand the go-to-market function, in a place in a market where I could capitalize on a lot of revenue, I'm missing growth opportunity, and I'm not doing my job effectively, My job is to grow the business. So I'm not doing that. Worse so, my competition likely is going to grow the business in that. And it's very difficult to displace a fortified hill. So I'm missing opportunity there. So I absolutely positively cannot miss that. My job is to grow the business, and it's a double-edged sword. However, if I overinvest in a particular area and I put salespeople in an area and assign a certain quota that has to be attainable, if I put too many people in that area, what happens is they don't attain their quota. They don't make money. They ultimately leave the organization because it is not a place that they're going to be successful. And then I lose salespeople and have enough salespeople out selling in order to hit the number. And it's not very good, and it's very expensive, for me to hire an individual, onboard that individual, invest in that individual, and then not make them successful. That's very expensive if they're not effective and successful in their job. So it is a very, very difficult job, a very difficult thing to get right, but it is so important in order to get that right and capitalize on it.
Can you tell me how you've done this historically in other roles at other companies?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I can. There are some repressed memories that I have. There's a lot of post-traumatic stress. But historically, how I had done this had been typically in Google Sheets or in Excel. And the process to go through that was incredibly, incredibly difficult. As I had mentioned, obviously data-driven, everyone is making these decisions. You have to do it effectively. And typically I would work with an ops partner, somebody like Orla, to go through and come up with where the plan would be and where we're going to make investments. Inevitably, those conversations always resulted in several questions. So a different way to look at the information to determine, okay, is this the right decision? Okay. When I did that, very often what it was is a game of fetch with a Labrador Retriever. And what I mean by that is I would say, well, what about this? What if I look at something by NDR? What if I look at the penetration of the customer base within that? What if I look at the productivity? What if I look at the ramp time of the reps and we hiring new people in that area? And they're successful out of the gate. And the interesting thing is every time you answer one of those questions, it drives a new question. You don't know what the second question is until you get the answer for the first, right? It's kind of a decision tree process. So, how I had done that previously is I would ask those questions. Every single time one of those questions come up, it was an Excel download or a Google Sheet download. They would go back, do the calculation, very often slightly misunderstand what I was asking or the intent of my question, bring that back roughly a week later, which inevitably would be wrong, probably 50 to 70% of the time. So a slight nuance, but wrong. And 100% of the time, drive another question. So the challenge with that, when you're hiring people and try to figure out where to make investments, you're losing weeks on time, weeks on end. And where that gets really, really difficult is I have a recruiting team that says, okay, great. Brian, where are you going to invest? Where are you going to put people? We need to build a pipeline. You don't just hire someone overnight. And I'm like, well, I don't know yet. Don't know. Well, then what happens is I get behind a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Then all of a sudden in my plan, I have to make investments and get people in seat in a certain time. I'm unable to do that because I can't make the decision. So it's a very, very difficult process when you do it that way. With Sigma, those conversations happen. They're iterative, they're live. I can do it myself, or I can collaborate on those things. And there's not a back and forth in the week. It is legitimately a 4-week process down to a couple-hour process, right? So you condense that significantly in order to make those decisions. But not only making those decisions quick is important, you're making them more accurate. Because inevitably, when you go through that 4-week process, eventually you kind of give up a little bit, or you compromise on things because you have to make a decision at a certain point. So you make bad decisions, which is way more expensive, right? So you have to compromise either a bad decision or a late decision. It's a really hard thing to pick on, to one or the other. It's a no-win situation. So, that was immediately one of the things that the reason I came to Sigma is when I saw this, originally was talking to them, I was going through that phase of the year and that process, which was very painful. And when I saw this, a light bulb just went off and I was like, wow, this is a game changer. So.
And you said historically it'd always be Google Sheets or Excel. I mean, Cognos was an analytics product. They were doing it in Excel?
Actually, nope. We would do it in PowerPlay, which is a whole other conversation.
Okay.
You're going to build the cube, and then you have to go back to Transformer, which I'm dating myself with this stuff, and then go to additional things from Transformer to build that overnight or generally over a week. That was even a more painful process, candidly. Actually, I don't know if it was more painful or not, but equally as painful. The difference is that with Sigma, given that we are a direct view into the warehouse, there's really no information that we cannot get. There's never been a time where I'm like, you know what, I'd like to look at this attribute by that, or I'd like to incorporate this information in. I'd like to incorporate any data source, whether it be from recruiting on Greenhouse and what the acceptance rate is, or look at people's adherence to enablement and the rating of the leaders of those people enablement and the output of their performance. So I'm like, there's really no challenge associated with incorporating a different data source. So anything I can think of, we can do right there on the spot. I don't have to go back to, a data engineer or somebody that can build that cube or architect that or ETL that or whatever it might be to do that. So it's what I would say is that, cloud data warehousing, whether it be Snowflake or Databricks or BigQuery, we use Snowflake here, it has fundamentally changed things, right? And that paired with Sigma has changed that paradigm significantly.
So the both of you have been in Sigma for quite a bit now. Can you share any best practices with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say that certainly in the new normal, so your market conditions have been interesting, right? Very dynamic, volatile, and they have been for a while in different directions. So, a best practice that we implement here is that revenue planning isn't done once a year, right? And normally it had to be done once a year because it was so painful that you just couldn't physically sustain to do it all the time. But we do it every single quarter. It's a way to responsibly and effectively manage the business when there's extreme volatility, one way or the other, which we've seen volatility in both directions over the past, 24, 36 months. So being able to do that, like an agile revenue planning process and a quarterly process is absolutely a best practice. The other thing that I would say is that whenever you're doing these things, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, is that you have to enable your team as well. So depending how big the organization is and at what scale you're doing that, you can do a top down, but you also need to do some element of bottoms up. You need to do both of those things because, again, I'll use another cliche. Everyone likes to measure. No one likes being measured, right? So when you go tell someone this is the way it is because of the data and don't give them the ability to say like, well, no, that's not entirely wrong. Here's some context and here's some additional data that actually proves it a different reason. And here's a place where I can grow the business that you weren't thinking about. Context matters, right? Data is absolutely important. Obviously, I would never argue that, but data without context can be dangerous as well. And the only way you can combine data and context is you empower individuals that are closer to the business that have the context to make the decision. So the best practices I have are two, maybe three actually. One is that be agile and do it. Do it frequently. If you do it once a year, you can get into trouble in this market, a lot of trouble. Secondly is that you have to enable your team to be able to do that, but you have to kind of one and the same, you have to be able to communicate what the plans are and the reason that you came to the decision you did with data behind it. If you basically just say, this is what we're doing, and you don't give any data or reasons why you did that, your team is going to lose confidence. They're not going to understand it. They're not going to explain it. And then all of a sudden it's a plan that was handed to them. And they're not going to feel confident of that. And that lack of confidence is going to flow down the organization. You need to be aligned on those things and understand it. So long-winded point, sorry. But yeah, two things, agile and make it, a collaborative process.
Orla, anything you'd add?
Yeah, I suppose I will speak to some extent to the operations people out here. As an operations person, I know part of our role is to see around corners and to try and help our CRO see around corners. And that has never been more important than it is right now. It's always been important, but right now it's particularly important because, as Brian said, market conditions are dynamic at the moment. So understanding what's coming and understanding what the leading indicators are telling us is absolutely crucially important. And I understand that it's challenging to see around corners while you're also operating at breakneck speed in the business today. So my advice, and it's as much to any CRO out there as it is to an operations person, is set up your reporting so that you can see those leading indicators at a glance at all times. Think about things like understanding your pacing towards targets, in whether that's pipe gen targets or pipe building targets or pipe progression targets. Set that up from the get-go so that you can take a look at it at any given day and say, we are either on pace or off pace. And if we're off pace, who is off pace and why are they off pace? Back to Brian's point, let's get that context, because that has helped us here at Sigma make some fairly dynamic decisions very, very quickly as we start to see some indicators change for us. For me, that's been game changing. That is helping us to not make mistakes that we might have otherwise made when we'd be in a scenario like Brian has described. So set it up from the beginning, make that investment. It pays off for sure, particularly for ops people that love to know the answer to questions, because we hate not knowing the answers to questions. It's just how we're built.
Aim small, miss small.
Right.
All right. Orla, Brian, thanks so much for taking us through this conversation. I think that's a great segue to move into Oscar's demo here for revenue planning in action within Sigma. So Oscar, it's all you.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach. Hey, everyone. My name is Oscar Bashaw. Again, a demo engineer here at Sigma. Been with the company about 2 years. Actually started on Orla's team. And now I'm working for the demo engineering org. So let me share my screen here. You guys got this? Cool. So today I'm going to be showing you how you can do revenue planning with Sigma. And there are a few things to look out for in today's demo. First, with Sigma, we've got a nice spreadsheet UI built into the product, which makes ad hoc analysis really easy. You don't have to write any SQL. You don't have to wait for anybody to write SQL. You can answer questions as you ask them. Second, you also have access to all of your data, and it's always live because it's coming from the warehouse. So that complete picture, that entirety of the context lets you see opportunity level details, which makes your analysis more accurate and it ultimately lets you hit your number. And then thirdly, Sigma makes some cool modeling really, really easy because we're working, again, with the spreadsheet UI, but it makes for revenue forecasting quick and easy built in the cloud. Just a quick, I guess, level set about the data that we're using. So we're mocking this up on Salesforce data, the tables that you're all familiar with, like account, an opportunity, and maybe a fiscal calendar, et cetera. And we're taking that using Fivetran to pipe it into Snowflake, and then using Sigma on top of that to analyze it. So this is how we do things here at Sigma. This is what we call the modern data stack. It might look a little bit different. It could be HubSpot here as a CRM. You could be using Databricks or BigQuery as the warehousing tool, but this is the general pipeline we're looking at. Great, let's get started. So some brief context on this demo. You're the CRO of a SaaS company doing about 190 million in ARR across the US. The board has asked you to increase revenue by 15% for the next fiscal year. And you have to figure out how to make that happen. How are you going to grow the business responsibly, like Brian said? So we've got 2 business segments, commercial and enterprise, and then 8 regions under your management. Productivity target for commercial is just under 300K, and for enterprise is about $1 million. Last week, you talked to your ops analyst. They built you a workbook, and you guys are going to sit down and explore current performance and then do some scenario modeling. Great. So just up top, we can see that the quarterly revenue for the company has been, okay over the past few quarters. Really took a dip in Q1 and Q2 of this year, but it started to pick up in Q3. So that explains why we're looking for the growth to continue into the next quarter. And what we want to look for today is ways we can grow the business. So the first thing that the CRO asks for is, hey, can I see rep productivity broken down by segment? And that's what we have here. You see that commercial reps are doing about 190K in annual productivity, and enterprise just over 800K. But this really doesn't answer much for me. If I'm looking for places to grow the business and to potentially add reps, this doesn't help me much. I want to extend this analysis back a few quarters here. and see what does this look like in terms of a trend. And I can see a little more here. Enterprise has been, okay, and commercial hasn't been great either. I'm now thinking, what if I could see this broken down by region as well? And to do that, I can hop into explore mode, find a region down here, and then add that to the pivot. And so really quickly, I start to build this nice, more complete picture that tells a lot more than just those two initial productivity numbers that I got. And something to call out is that if I was using the traditional workflow of having an analyst write SQL, get some results set back to me, and then putting that in Excel, these two questions might take a week or more to get answered or to follow up with. But here in Sigma, I've done it in just a moment. So one thing that jumps out to me immediately is that the Enterprise Pac Northwest is really strong in terms of their productivity. They're well over $1 million a quarter for the past few quarters. And I'm thinking that this could be a good place to grow the business. I also think now I want to look at NDR as a metric and see how that stacks up for each segment in each region over the past few quarters. And to do that, I can just simply add a quick calculation. I'll take recurring revenue from the current period, divide that by recurring revenue from the previous period. And you see that I just used a couple of UI features to do that. I wrote a quick formula here in the formula bar, very similar to how you would do it in a spreadsheet. So let me format that as a %, and then get a little bit nicer. Great. So I'm seeing in the Pac Northwest Enterprise, NDR goes from 102 3 quarters ago to 142 last quarter, and then 214 in the most recent quarter. And that's great. I mean, that's really strong growth, but this 214 number is making me a bit suspicious. That's way too high for NDR, right? And because I'm the CRO and I have the context and I know what's going on in the business, I remember hearing about a deal that closed last quarter in this territory that was like a huge upsell deal. And I think that that could be affecting things. So I can right click, go to show underlying. And what this will do is it'll take me right to the actual deals that are driving that 214% NDR number. So if I look at the right here, I see this first deal, Diana Shipping upsell for 1.1 million. And the next biggest deals in this region are 450K, 330, 150. This $1.1 million upsell, not scalable. It's not repeatable. And I think it's going to skew my business. So I'm going to go ahead and exclude it from the analysis. And quickly, we'll see that this will update the entire chart here. And that NDR number, Pac Northwest Enterprise, is now 158. So still super strong, but not absurd like we saw before. So great. Now I've got a pretty good beat on the Pac Northwest Enterprise, and I think I want to add some reps there. But to do that, I need to make sure that I actually have the pipeline to add those reps responsibly, like Brian was talking about, right? I don't want to throw 10 or 15 reps into a territory that doesn't have the pipe coverage to go forward. So I'm going to come into edit mode, and I'm actually going to build out that pivot table and do that analysis right now. When I say pivot, I'm going to build this on top of our pipeline table, which is just an opportunity table filtered down to the open deals. I can pivot by segment and by region like I was before. And I want to see this broken out by the fiscal quarter of the close date. So this is my framework. And then for the values, I want to see, okay, let me take the sum of all opportunities. So the amount, I want to weight that by the probability that they close. Great. And format this as a dollar amount. One thing I'm noticing is that I forgot to exclude the renewals. We're looking at new business here, so I don't really care about renewals when I look at pipe. Really quickly, I can pivot and just add that to my calculation. I'll make it a sum if, and I'll say type is not equal to renewal. And very quickly, I'm able to course correct and correct that mistake that I made in the analysis. So let me add some conditional formatting and make it a color scale. Great. So really quickly, I was able to add just that simple spreadsheet formula here, add some formatting to this pivot table, and now I see that the Pac Northwest Enterprise has a weighted pipe of 6.9 mil for this quarter, 5.9 for the next quarter, 5.5 for the quarter after that. And I know personally that we have 20 reps in the Pac Northwest Enterprise. Their quarterly quota is about 250K. So 5 million is plenty to cover the business here. And that's not even including any deals that we're going to generate for the quarters coming up. So I feel confident about this right now. But going back to our initial question, right, to grow revenue, I need to grow revenue for this coming year. I don't need it for next year. So if these reps take 3 or 4 quarters to get ramped up, that's not going to help me. And to just test that hypothesis and make sure that they are going to ramp quickly, I'm going to look at their attainment here. This is a table that I've already built out, but it really only takes 5 or 7 minutes to build. So what I'm looking at here is if I go to the Enterprise Pac Northwest and I look at Q2, this tells me that in the second quarter of any given rep's tenure, the average NACV is about 188K, which is 151% of their attainment for that ramp quarter. If I look at Q3, in their third quarter, reps are closing 260K of new business for 105%, and then 129% attainment in their fourth quarter. So these reps are ramping really quickly in the Pac Northwest Enterprise. That's great. That's encouraging. If I wanted to bore you guys all to death, I could go ahead and do an analysis of like the penetration into the territory. But instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is actually tag the director for that region, Alfonso, and ask him, hey, can you do an analysis of penetration? So I'll comment that. I can now publish this, share it to Alfonso, and he'll come over, be able to see the same workbook, work on the same stuff that I was working on, and take his analysis from there. Great. So let's say Alfonso gets back to me and he tells me, hey, Oscar, I think we can add 10 reps to this territory next quarter. That's great. I want to know where that's going to get me in terms of my growth number, though. So to do that, I'm going to hop over to this modeling tab. This is going to allow me to forecast what's going to happen to my revenue number if I add some reps. So right now we're forecasting 208 million for fiscal 24, but the 15% growth target puts our goal at 239. And if I add, let's see, Pac Northwest and Enterprise here, I've excluded that big upsell deal. I see that currently we've got 19 reps in the region. The average productivity over the past few quarters is 300K. And if I hire them in the next 60 days before the fiscal year starts, I'm expecting them to be fully ramped for 2 quarters of the 4 next fiscal year. So let's say I've got 19 now, but Alfonso thinks we can actually add 10 based on those metrics we saw on the previous page. So if I add 10 reps, we'll see the needle here will start to move up, and we'll get an idea of what additional revenue that will create. So 10 reps doing 2 quarters at full ramp might get me another 7.5 million revenue. So about a quarter of the way to our goal. And that's great. But we also saw that those reps in the Pac Northwest Enterprise were ramping really quickly. And I think if we get some work done on enablement and on onboarding, I can actually get them fully ramped for 3 quarters next year. And let's see how that would move the needle. And you see it'll tick up a little bit more here. So now we're at 10 million. Right. So now we're a third of the way to our goal. We've got a pretty accurate picture of what we want to do. And I've actually modeled this really nicely in Sigma, not writing any code. It's all just built on this simple spreadsheet-like table down here using good old multiplication. So I could go ahead and do this for more territories if I want, see what it's going to take to get me to that $31 million growth number. But I'll leave that for another call. But today what we saw is that with Sigma, you've got the great ability to do ad hoc analysis and answer those follow-up questions really quickly. You can get down to the opportunity level information and see that deal that's skewing your analysis and then exclude it. And then you can build some really quick but powerful and accurate models here in Sigma. I'll hand it back to you now, Zach.
All right. Bring back our slides. So quick plug for the Q&A panel. There's a few questions in there already. We can start walking through, but if anybody has any more, feel free to pop them in there. Oscar, first question is for you. you were saying that we were working on Salesforce data.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a limit? Can we use other data sources than just that?
Absolutely, we can. Yeah, so like I said, the demo is built on Salesforce data, but if you have another CRM like HubSpot, or you're keeping your sales data somewhere else, as long as you can get it into a data warehouse like a Snowflake or a Redshift or a BigQuery or a Databricks, you can put Sigma on top of that and analyze it. It works all the same. And you can actually tie various data sources together like Orla was talking about.
Okay, and I got another one here. How easy is it to mix aggregating functions on the same pivot table? So like, I know some tools, they'll limit to just like, okay, I could do a sum of this value. Can I do a sum of this value plus an average of another divided by the square of a third?
Totally. If you can do it, if you have the data there and we have the function, or you can write the function, we can do it. So there's no limitations. It makes everything possible for you.
And somebody was astounded at how the performance looked. Were you going against aggregated data, or was that detailed data?
No, we saw when I got down to that outlier deal and excluded it, that's the raw data table right there. The opportunity table, each line is an opportunity with an amount and an owner, etc. So we're taking that data that might be 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 rows, right? Or even more potentially. And we're building our pivot tables on top of that. That's one of our core capabilities at Sigma, is our ability to pivot on millions or even billions of rows of data and do that performantly.
Very cool. And one of the questions of this demo, but I think it might be even more fun to direct this one to Orla. They want to know how up to date the data in Oscar's demo was. But I mean, I think Orla, you could talk a little bit internally how up to date we keep our Salesforce refreshes.
Yeah, absolutely. So we push data to Snowflake from Salesforce every 5 minutes. So there is never more than a 5-minute lag between something happening in Salesforce and something being shown and rendered in Sigma. And that can actually be accelerated, which is something we often do at the end of a quarter when we're closing out deals and we're following them in real time. We do a more immediate sync of the data. Why that is important, and in the anecdote I just shared there, it's for fun because we want to see the things show in Sigma almost immediately, especially when we're closing out, all the deals at the end of a quarter. But why it's important to keep that data as refreshed as often as possible is that it gives us a live view. So there's never any time between something happening in Salesforce or in the product or in Outreach or in HubSpot and that data being available to us in Sigma. So that conversation that often happens between a CRO and their ops person, or a CRO and their CFO is, well, how live is that data? We can say for sure it's live. It's what's happening right now in our business.
Great. And one for you, Oscar. How do we manage read versus write? So maybe I have like a whole bunch of forecast numbers I want to upload via CSV, but from a security perspective, I get a little heartburn thinking about source tables getting written over in my cloud data warehouse. So How does that play out?
Yeah, so Sigma's, we're reading data from your warehouse, right? But for example, if you had a CSV with a bunch of forecast numbers, you can really easily just upload that into the Sigma UI. We're going to write that back to your warehouse. It's not going to be stored ever in Sigma, but it'll be as a separate table in your warehouse. And then from there, you can incorporate that CSV into the rest of your analysis, just like you would any other table. And like we saw, you've got the ability to input some numbers. Soon we're going to have the ability to do input tables where you can have your own kind of sheet in there and you can play with it like you would any other spreadsheet, which is going to be really, really powerful.
So excited about that.
And on your modeling sheet there, Oscar, for all that forecasting, how were those functions built out? Could you talk a little bit about the formulas you're using?
Yeah, so there was, like I said, there was no code being written there. All that I was doing was taking, looking at each region, each segment, and finding the productivity based on the calculations we did kind of on the first page to take, what is your total NACV versus your quota months, et cetera. That's a simple division. And then from there, you can take productivity, multiply that out by the number of reps and the number of quarters that they're fully ramped. So it's just multiply, 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 add up each segment in each region for the quarter or for the year, and that gives you your aggregate number.
All right. And I'm just curious from my own standpoint, all those sales numbers, it's all rep performance. What's keeping me from just using this as like my QBR template?
Nothing. Well, that specific demo we showed is revenue planning, but you've got all this data in the warehouse, right? That's opportunities, and it tells you if you're a rep, hey, you closed this many deals, you did this many upsells, these are your net new logos, etc. You can take that and actually build a whole presentation deck using Sigma, which is really powerful. And that's something we do here internally. I think Orla can speak more to that, or Brian can.
Yeah, absolutely. I could. Again, kind of going back to past experiences, I know we talked about revenue planning, and maybe that'll be a follow-on around QBRs and then kind of metrics and operational aspects of this. But in my previous lives, it was always a number of screenshots that were taken from legacy BI tools that were ended up in a Google Doc, and it was a point in time that I got once a quarter. And then I had in the days when I was a sales rep, I would have to go fill out a bunch of things in a PowerPoint. And here at Sigma, we have consistent metrics that everyone knows, how they're being measured and what those are. It's very clear across the board. And then when we present in those, Sigma is incredibly agile in the sense you can add text in there and dynamic text, which we didn't really talk about, but there's a narrative of the individual of how they're performing, what the target is. So legitimately, they really don't have to put any text in. All of the data pre-populates those things. What we did actually enable the team to do kind of as a joke, but not really, given that usually in a QBR, you're updating a bunch of decks. We said you can add a picture. That's all you have to do. So we allowed them to add a picture into the workbook, which was a picture that described how their quarter went. But legitimately, that was the only thing that they had to update. If you think about going back to my days when I was doing that, there were hours and hours spent across a large number of people updating decks to be able to present those things out. We've automated that entirely.
Excellent. All right. So to wrap up, quick lightning round for the remaining questions. Yes, Sigma can be embedded in Salesforce. So somebody wanted to make sure that if they want to see the 5,000 metrics you brought up, Brian, in Salesforce, yes, you can. We can embed directly within it. We have actually a pretty easy guide to walk you right through that. And somebody else wanted to find out how they can try Sigma. We have a free trial right on our website, www.sigmacomputing.com. You can sign right up. And yes, you can also burst sending dashboards. We have a great scheduler option, and that can be set up for changes within the data even. So somebody goes across a certain threshold, you can have a great email to go out and say that they hit their number. So a lot of flexibility in the platform for a lot of those existing bursting capability. But Orla, Brian, Oscar, thank you for providing this presentation for everybody. We're going to be following up with other fun webinars, and I think this might be one of the remaining ones before the holidays, but there will be an email afterwards that will tell you the upcoming schedule for webinars and the actual recording. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
That's a wrap.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.